Well, welcome to Ridge Church. My name is Marty McCrary. I'm one of the new pastors here at Ridge. And if I haven't had the opportunity to meet you, I would love to meet you. But also, if you're like me and you're new, all you have to do is just text Ridge to 94,000. And if you're also like me, you love to sing. So we're getting ready to transition to a time of just singing a couple songs. Why don't you sing with us?
I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Said man's empty grace, treasures that fade, I never enough. Then you came along and put me back together. And every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Hey. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing is better than you. Said I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley. There's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn praise into goddess. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing is better than you. You turn grace into goddess. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who
Here is where I lay down every burden, every crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay down every lion. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay down every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. And I'll make room for you to do whatever you want, to do whatever you want. And I'll make room for you, Jesus, to do whatever you want, to do whatever you want to. And I'll make room for you, Jesus, to do whatever you want, my heart, to do whatever you want. And I'll make room for you, to do whatever you want, to do whatever you want to, Jesus. Come and have your way, Jesus. Break down the walls, break down the walls. Your way is better. Your way is better. Shake up the ground, Jesus. Shake up the ground of all my tradition. Break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. Shake up the ground of all my tradition. Break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better, Jesus. Oh, your way is better. Shake up the ground of all my tradition. Break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. Shake up the ground of all my tradition. Break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. And I will make room for you, Father, to do whatever you want, my heart, to do whatever you want. And I will make room for you, yes I will, to do whatever you want, to do whatever you want to. Shake up my house as we make room for you. Sing. And here is where I lay down. You are all I'm chasing now. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. And here is where I lay down. You are all I'm chasing now. This is my surrender. This is my surrender.
Hey everybody, thanks for singing together with us. My name is Patrick. I'm so grateful for those of you who choose to be generous here at Ridge Church. And it's because of your giving here to this local church that enables so many really great things to take place, including two environments called Wombaland and Upstreet. Now, some of you are already very familiar with Wombaland and Upstreet because it's our children's environments For all the kids from birth all the way up through the 5th grade. They're fun and engaging environments that have helped us see a whole lot of life change through the years, and kids love them so much. In fact, so many parents have told us often that the reason they come to Ridge Church is because their kids drag them back Sunday after Sunday because they love Womberland and Upstreet so much. And that is only possible because of your giving here to this local church. So we just want to say thank you, as well as invite any of you who may be considering beginning to give here to Ridge Church. It's really easy to get started. You can simply text the word Ridge to 94,000 and we'll help you begin. Well, today we're starting a brand new series called Dumpster Fire. I mean, what else did you expect to hear us talk about at church? You guys know what I'm talking about, right? If you think through the past year, the past 2 years, the past several years even, we have been through some really heavy stuff. And sometimes if you look around in the world, it feels like the whole thing is just falling apart, like one big dumpster fire. And what do most of the people around us tend to do? Point fingers and talk about who is to blame. Well, today we're beginning a series where we're going to try to answer the question, who is responsible? I think it's going to be so helpful for us as a church. So next up is our lead pastor, Chris Brown, with part 1 of Dumpster Fire.
All right, has there been a moment, or maybe a series of moments, but at least a moment in the last 18 months where you looked up and thought, okay, that's it. We are officially in a dumpster fire. If not, I would just like to congratulate you on your annoyingly positive outlook on life. So good job on you. But for the other 98 or 99.9% of us, we are there. We have seen it. We have experienced it. We have touched, tasted, felt it in every imaginable way. And you know what our response has been? To point fingers. We're trying to figure out who is to blame, whose fault is this entire thing. And so, of course, the answer to this, of whose fault it is it's the Republicans. No, that's not it. It's the Democrats. It's their fault. See, some of you got a little bit nervous for just a second. You're like, oh, I thought I was going to have to tune out. But let me just let you know up front, I'm going to be an equal opportunity offender today. We pointed fingers at everybody. You're like, no, you know who it is? It's the All Lives Matter people. It's them. If they weren't so loud, no, it's the Black Lives Matter people. Now, you know who it is. The problem, I'll tell you who's responsible for this. It's the woke church. No. It's the Christian nationalist church. They're the problem. It's those people. It's the ones doing that. It's the anti-vaxxers. No, it's the vaccine people. It's the anti-mask people. No, it's the mask people. And the argument goes back and forth, and it's their problem. You know whose fault it is? You know really who ultimately is to blame and responsible for all of this? It's climate change. Yeah, it's climate change. I actually think it's the U.S. Postal Service. That one actually might be the closest to the truth yet. It seems like somehow they are at the epicenter of all of this. You know who it is? You know who's responsible? It's the homeschool kids. I'm sorry. No one actually thinks, just calm down. No one thinks it's the homeschool kids because obviously it's the public school kids. It's their fault, right? It's unbelievable. In this last season, we have blamed anyone and everyone. Everyone from the family dog to the mailman to the Amazon Prime driver that got your stuff there, rush delivery, somehow it was his fault, to the governor, to the school board, to your neighbor, to everyone, including yours truly, your pastor. It's funny, sometimes I'm like, wait a second, what do I have to do with any of this? Like, I tell people all the time, like, I have a master's degree in theology, which is helpful for absolutely none of this. Like, it has not been helpful at all in figuring out COVID protocols. It's like, well, hang on a second. Let me flip to the book of Habakkuk and see what it has to say about that. Oh, wait, look, shocker. It says nothing about any of this. Nothing about masks, nothing about vaccines, nothing about COVID protocols. And it's been an absolute dumpster fire, hasn't it? Blaming everyone, pointing fingers. You did it, they said it. If they had done this, if they hadn't done this, and we're trying to figure out who's to blame. We're pointing fingers, trying to figure out who's responsible for this entire thing. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and take a step back before we take a step forward. And let me just tell you this. This blame game is not a new play that this generation is running. This thing has been around for a long time. In fact, it's as old as the Garden of Eden. You go back to the Garden of Eden, God gives mankind one rule, like one rule. He's like, pretty much you got free reign of the place. You can do whatever you want. It's going to be great, but I got this one thing that I want you not to do. And what do? We broke the one rule. It's like, I imagine how frustrating this was for God. It's like, I gave you one rule and you broke the one rule that I gave you. Now, if you're a parent, you probably can kind of identify with this. You're like, I got one rule in the house. Okay, well, maybe I got several rules, but I got one big rule. It was that you don't come in after 12 o'clock, and there you are coming in after 12 o'clock. Or maybe your one big rule was no underage drinking. Number one, it's illegal. Number two, your frontal lobe is not fully formed, so it's a really bad combination. Like, we have rules, and they're broken. And so if you're a parent, perhaps you can identify with God in this moment. Now, the funny thing is, watch what Adam does. The very first thing, when the rules are broken, Adam immediately starts placing blame. You know what he does? He said, it was Eve. It was her. Like, without any hesitation, his first instinct is to throw his wife underneath the bus. You want to know what else started in the Garden of Eden? Marital and relational conflict started in the Garden of Eden. Right there, that's the origin story for all relational conflict. In case you were wondering, it started right here. He says, it was a woman. It was her, God. But it's interesting. At first look, it feels like he's blaming the woman, but if you look a little bit closer, he says, it's the woman you gave me. Hold on, Adam. So he just kind of goes up the ranks. He's like, actually, God, this is kind of on you. Like, I would like to blame you, God, because it's the woman you gave me. Because things were going all right in the garden before the woman came along. Like, granted, I was a little bit lonely, but at least I still lived in the garden. Now, because of the woman, I got kicked out of the garden, and it's the woman you gave me, so ultimately it's on you, God. And it's like he's pointing fingers in every direction. Like, everyone is responsible except for him. Now, the woman is clearly the smartest one in this situation. Maybe in every situation, but definitely the smartest one in this situation. You know who she blames? She blames the serpent. Now, that's a pretty smart move, and it's much smarter than the play that Adam was trying to run. But right here, at the very outset, the very first blame game starts, and that's where this whole thing of pointing fingers, the first identifying mark of it that we see. And here's what I would say. It's in your DNA. Congratulations. It's in my DNA. It's just part of who we are. Even when something is obviously our fault, there's this thing in us that wants to defer. We want to point fingers somewhere else. We want to shift the blame and shift the responsibility. And it's interesting. If you have children, if you remember being a child, if you work with children in any way, this often crops up in kids before they're even old enough to really know what they're doing, before they would have had an opportunity to be taught or even learn this. They learn to point fingers. So we found a great example of this. I think you'll love this. Take a look.
So what did you do wrong?
Nothing.
You didn't do anything wrong?
No. I did everything right in my room. I did everything right.
Tiffany. Now, what is that right there? What is that?
Donut.
It's a what?
Donut.
Were you supposed to get a donut?
No.
No, I can still see the donut.
Can you see that?
I can still see it. Look at me. Now, did I tell you that you could have a donut?
No.
I didn't, right? So why did you come in here and tell me a story? Well, Tiffany, what's inside that hat? Move the donut that's on top of the hat. And open up the hat. So you stole a whole donut, huh? You didn't? What is that I'm looking at?
This.
I'm looking at the hat. So I don't see that donut? Tiffany, open your hand. There's a donut, right?
There.
Yeah. And where was it supposed to be?
In the donut thing.
Yeah, in that container.
And he found it, put it in there.
No, it was in there. Somebody took it out.
Yeah.
Who?
It was Daddy.
Really?
Yeah. He took it out.
But Daddy's not here.
No, Miles took it out.
Miles was in here with Mommy.
No, he's not.
He was in here.
But he wasn't.
So what were you doing?
Nothing. Nothing.
Nothing?
No.
So did you have the donut?
No.
You didn't? And then who had the donut?
Mouse
Really?
had a big donut.
Mouse had the big donut?
Go ask him.
Miles had a big donut. Go ask him. She said, I'm not going to lie. The whole time I was watching this video, I kept thinking, I would really love to know Miles' take on this whole situation. I think it would have been pretty entertaining if I had to guess if he had been in there. The funny thing is the whole time this is going on, the donut is literally in her hands. Like she's wiping donut off of her face and she's denying the whole thing. She's like, no, it was my dad. Like she says, well, your dad's not here. And then as smooth as butter, she doesn't miss a step in the transition. She says, oh, it was Miles. It was Miles. He's the one that did all of this. And again, the whole time, the donut is in her hand. Why? Why is this happening? Because it's in her DNA, and it's in my DNA, and it's in your DNA. We just point fingers and we blame. So here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to try to do. I want to take a stab at answering this question, who is at fault? Who is responsible for this dumpster fire that we're all acknowledging and can acknowledge that we're in? So when I was a kid, I was terrified of the basement. It freaked me out. I'm not going to lie. We had this unfinished basement. It smelled weird, and it was just super creepy, right? I did not like it as a kid, and the light was on a string. So you had to run to the middle of the room to turn on the light. When this thing was dark, it was just like, there was nothing good about it. So if I ever had to go into the basement, I would sprint to the middle of the room and I would reach in the dark till I could find the string and pull the string. Like that was my first thing was like, the minute that room was lit, everything was just a little bit more bearable and it was a little bit better. Because when the room is lit, everything is better. That's a dad joke if you didn't see what I was doing there. But I was terrified of the dark. Like this room, the whole thing in particular, but occasionally what would happen is I would run over in the basement, find the string, I would pull the string and the light would not come on. Like I'm like pulling it, I'm starting to panic because when the light didn't come on, I'm just telling you, it was a problem. Because every horror movie that has ever been made had a scene just like that in it. Somebody somewhere in a creepy room, probably in a basement that smelled just like that one, and the light wouldn't come on. So for me, the light not being on was a serious problem. Now, if you can think of me being in that situation, or if you have ever been in a similar situation, think about this. What is your first response? Like other than to like sprint back to the stairs as fast as you can and get out of there. Like what is your first response? Is it, man, stupid darkness. I can't believe the darkness is so dark in here. Or is your first response, the light isn't working? Obviously, in a situation like that, you're pulling on the cord, it's dark. The first thing you think is the light isn't working. Why? It makes no sense to blame the dark for darkness. Dark creates darkness. That's what it does. Dark is being consistent with its nature when it creates darkness. That's the way things work. In fact, there's this really smart guy by the name of Webster, and this is how he says it. He says this, that darkness is essentially the absence of light. So if it's dark, just stay with me, in the basement and anywhere in life, if it's dark, it's because the light isn't present. You don't blame the dark. It's just the lack of light being there. So when it's dark, you don't blame darkness. You just assume there's an absence of light, or you assume that the light isn't working as it's supposed to work. Now, I want you to hold on to this idea. And we're going to go straight into the scriptures, but I want you to carry this thought, this mentality into the scriptures. Today, I want to look at a few verses from one of the most famous passages of Scripture and certainly one of the most famous sermons ever preached. It's called the Sermon on the Mount, famous because Jesus, he was pretty good at his job. Jesus was the one that was preaching this sermon. Now, many scholars believe that Jesus' primary audience for the Sermon on the Mount, which takes place in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, that his primary audience was his closest followers, his disciples. Now, we don't know if that was the 12 or a larger group of 100 or 120, but most people believe that that was his primary audience. But that as Jesus taught, the crowd began to grow. Because here's the thing. When Jesus preached and when Jesus taught, the crowds got bigger. For all of us, the longer we teach, usually the smaller the crowd gets. Now, that's not quite fair because Jesus had pretty cool party tricks. He took water and turned it into wine. He took a boy's lunch and used it, multiplied it for thousands and thousands of people to eat. So he had some pretty cool tricks that he had to work with that's a little unfair because we don't have that advantage as communicators. But here's what most scholars believe, that he was teaching to this smaller group, and that somewhere along the way in the Sermon on the Mount, it feels like the gears shift, and he kind of looks out, and he preaches to a wider audience. Which, if you think about it, if he's teaching and he's doing a good job and it's just his followers and the crowd begins to grow and grow and grow, and he looks up and a few people have become hundreds or even thousands, he does what anybody would do. He starts to address the larger audience. But at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is talking to his disciples. And he uses these two metaphors back to back where he talks about light and he talks about salt. And in the second half, he talks about light, and that's where we're going to pick up. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 14 through 16, he says this. He says, "You are the light of the world." Now, I want to stop here and just make sure that we're all on the same page. When he says you, I want you to know who he was talking to. Again, he's talking to his closest followers, his disciples. So, if you are a follower of Jesus, he's talking to you. These disciples also, they were the foundations. They were the OGs. They were the beginning of the church. They became the foundational members of the church, so to speak. So, if you are a part of the church, you would consider yourself a part of the church, then he's talking to you. When he says you, he's talking about followers of Jesus. He's talking about the church. He says, "You are the light of the world." And it continues. He says, "A town built on a hill cannot be hidden." So he's using these two different ideas to communicate the same point. He goes on, he says, "Neither do people put a light, or do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand." And we're going to come back and talk about that. It gives light to everyone in the house. And then he continues. He says, "In the same way," and this is where he's saying, I'm using a metaphor. Like Jesus, at this point, every Palestinian person, every Jewish person in the audience, they're with Jesus. There's a good chance that as he's talking about a city on a hill, he's pointing to a city that's on an actual hill. As he's talking about this light and the lamps and all this, everybody's nodding because they all have one of these in their home. He's saying, so this thing that you're familiar with, and they're all nodding. He says, in the same way, they get it. They get the function of it. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds, and then they will glorify your Father in heaven. Now, a lamp in a typical Palestinian home, it was usually a clay pot that had a little bit of a reservoir in the bottom for oil, and then usually some type of a spout where they would put a cotton or some kind of wax wick in that they would use to light the home. So they would light these lamps, and then they would put them somewhere in the center of the home. But oftentimes, if they were on the ground, because of the nature of them, they were kind of rudimentary, they wouldn't light the entire home. Now, even though most of these Palestinian homes would have been like a one-bedroom, kind of mud hut type of thing, it still maybe wouldn't illuminate the whole room. So if that was the case, then they would take a stand and they would elevate it, they would put it in a central location, and then from that point, in that central location, it would chase out the darkness and it would illuminate the entire room. Now again, what you got to know is Jesus' audience was with him. They all know because they all had one of these in their home. They knew exactly what he was talking about. So again, here's who Jesus is talking to. He's talking to the current disciples, but that are the picture of the future church. He's talking to his followers. So that includes you and I. So he's saying this, we are the light of the world. In the same way that this light on a lampstand in this small home would eliminate darkness, he's saying in the exact same way that you as the light, I as the light, we're supposed to do that for the world in which we live. We're supposed to be in a central place, and we're supposed to eliminate darkness. So, let's go back to where we started. Here's the question. If it feels a little bit dark around you, a little bit dumpster fire-esque, let's say, according to Jesus, who is responsible? Who's to blame for that? Should we blame the darkness, or should we re-examine the light? It doesn't really make any sense to blame the darkness for being dark. It's just doing what it does. It's being consistent with its nature. Like if all of these Jewish people listening to Jesus, they know if the room is dark, the first thing that they do is they go to their lamp and they check to see if everything's working right with the light. Like this is fascinating. The first thing they do is look to see, have they run out of oil? This is a different conversation for another day, but fascinating. When you look throughout the scriptures, Old Testament and New, oil oftentimes represents the Spirit of God or the presence of God. So it's this idea, he's just kind of sneaking it in. Jesus is this idea that maybe if there's no light, the oil, the Spirit of God, the presence of God has left the room. But here's the thing, if a room is dark in one of these guys' home or one of these ladies' homes, they don't look up and try to discover what's happening with the dark. Dark's doing what darkness does. The first thing they do is to examine the light and figure out what's going on. So when you walk into the basement and you pull the string, and it's still dark, I promise you, the problem is with the light. It's not with the darkness. Again, darkness is just doing what it does. Darkness is just the absence of light. And Jesus is saying this same thing. So let me ask you this again. And I want you to think about this. Whose fault is this dumpster fire? Who's responsible? The answer is it's ours. If you're a follower of Jesus, you are responsible. I'm responsible. And I know that as you hear that, that bothers you because it bothers me. And what I would tell you is take it up with Jesus because I'm just the messenger. Here's my bottom line today. This is my big idea for this whole talk. Stop blaming. Take responsibility. And do something. Stop blaming, take responsibility, and do something. Listen, stop blaming the darkness for doing what it does. Darkness is just dark. That's what it does. Take responsibility. Think about this. The absence of light creates darkness. The presence of light eliminates darkness. We have to take responsibility. And then we got to do something. Listen, maybe we got to go pull the string, make sure the light's working. Maybe you got to upgrade to an LED. Maybe you need to reposition the light so that it's in a different place in the room. We've got to do something. You've got to move towards this and actually do something, whatever you have to do. But stop blaming, take responsibility, and do something. Now, some of you hear me saying this, and you're doing the exact same thing that I would do if I was on the other side of me. You say, Chris, I see what you're doing. But here's the thing, and I hear all of that, but I didn't cause any of this. Like, none of this, like when I'm looking around, none of this is my fault. Now, some of you, it actually is your fault. You're causing a lot of things. But for some of you, genuinely, like you look and go, but Chris, I'm not the cause of any of this. None of this is my fault. To which I would say, that's not the point. Listen, if I pull the string and the light comes on, then the darkness goes away. It really doesn't matter why it's dark or what caused it. Jesus said that you're the light. He said, if I'm a follower of Jesus and you are, we are the light, and therefore we are the solution. So just because we weren't the cause doesn't mean you shouldn't be the solution. I want you to sit with this. Like, we're so worried about who's to blame. But listen, just because you weren't the cause doesn't mean that you're not responsible. So stop blaming. Take responsibility and do something. So here's what I want to do. I want to give one more really big thought and tell you a quick story, and then I want to give you one action. Jesus often talked about his kingdom. When he talked about his kingdom, he was simply talking about his way of doing things, his way of seeing things, his way of treating people. That was what he talked about and what he meant with his kingdom. And because Jesus talked about his kingdom a lot, we talk about his kingdom a lot as well. In fact, later in this exact same sermon, he told this exact same group of people something about his kingdom. And he said this, it's one of the more famous verses. Many people, whether you grew up in church or not, you've at least heard of this verse. He said, seek first my kingdom. Again, he's talking about my way of doing things, my way of thinking about things, my way of seeing people, my way of treating people. He's saying, seek first my kingdom. And then it feels like he adds a second thing, and my righteousness. Seek first my kingdom and my righteousness. Now, it seems like he's telling them to do two things or to seek two things, but it's really just one. That word righteousness is just another word for justice. Think about injustice, where something is going wrong for someone. And you think about justice is when you make it right. Actually, what Jesus is saying, the second thing is a subset of the first thing. He's saying this, that justice is a subset. Justice is a part. Justice is a condition of my kingdom. In other words, Jesus is saying, hey, I want you to bring my kingdom here. I want you to seek my kingdom first. But one of the conditions of my kingdom is justice. So, when you look around the world, when you look around your neighborhood, when you look around the places that you go, and there's still injustice, it means that in those places, Jesus' kingdom is not fully present yet. And it is our responsibility as followers of Jesus and as the church and our charge as followers of Jesus and the church to bring his kingdom here to as many people as we can for as long as we can. In the prayer that Jesus taught, to bring his kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. But the question is, how do you do that? So around here, we talk about this idea of bringing the light in the darkness. We talk about this idea of bringing the kingdom of Jesus here on earth as it is in heaven. We talk about it in these terms. We talk about it in terms of for and do. For and do. And here's what we say. There are three groups that we as a church are for. The first one is this. We're for the marginalized. I want you to think about those who can't do for themselves. It could be anything from food insecurities to people that don't have clean water to human trafficking, those that need help outside of themselves, people that need the power from the powerful to go to the powerless. It's giving a voice to those that don't have a voice. For me, as a white male, maybe it's lending my voice to my black and brown friends to help. Maybe it's for those of us who have a voice, lending a voice to those that are still in the womb and don't have a voice to speak on their own. It's moving towards those who can't help themselves and providing help in those places. So we move towards, we say we're for the marginalized. We also say this, we say we're for the next generation. We're so for the next generation. We want to prop them up to have a better existence and better community and better world to live in than the one we do. We want to hand the church off one day to the next generation in better shape, not worse. We are cheering for them. We want them to stand on our shoulders and look further, see further, go further because of us. And then we say that we're for lost sons and daughters. And what we mean by this is people that have yet to encounter or know or understand the profound love of God and know that they are made in the image of God. People that don't yet know that they wear the very image of God, therefore there's intrinsic value to their lives. They're loved by God. They're pursued by God, and that every single one of us are invited to be in relationship with God because of the work of Jesus on the cross. We want every person, and this is so core to the heart of our church, lost sons and daughters, to be found in Christ and to know the profound nature of being in relationship to him. These are the things that we're for. These are the groups that we are for. Why? Because when I look at the life of Jesus, this is who he was for. Read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He was constantly giving his voice to the voiceless, helping those in need. He was constantly stepping into the space for the marginalized and those that were for the marginalized. He was constantly saying, hey, let the little children, the next generation, let them come to me. He was saying, if you don't have the faith of a child, you may not be able to enter heaven. You got to be like a child. He was constantly advocating for the next generation. And Jesus was always leaning towards those that didn't know the love of the Heavenly Father, didn't know that they could be in relationship to God. He was always chasing lost sons and lost daughters. And for many of you, you hear these. And there's something about one of these or multiple of these or all of these that grabs your heart, and it's emotional. And you feel like you are for those as well. But here's what we say. It's not enough to feel something. It's not enough to be emotional. It's not enough to be on the sidelines and cheer. We say, you got to take another step. You can't stop there. The next thing you got to do is you got to do something. So here's what we say. In light of who we're for, here's what we do. We say that we want you to lead. You're gifted. There's something you're good at. There's a skill that you have. There's something that is effortless to you that when others look at it, it seems hard to them. They're like, how do you do it? You're gifted to lead. We want people to lead through the context of the local church. The second thing is this. We want you to give in light of who you're for. We want to be irrationally generous. Why? because of the marginalized, the next generation, lost sons and daughters. When you know where you're moving your gifting and your dollars and your generosity towards, it's so much easier to open your hands and say, of course, why would we not? In fact, there's a moral obligation to move towards these. So we want to live, we want to give, we want to lead, we want to give, we want to connect. When we talk about this, we talk about biblical community, we talk about discipleship, we talk about being in connection with people where there's a group of people who know your name and care for you and love you and pour into you. There's a group of people that pour their life into you so you can pour your life into them. It's such a foundational thing. And then the last one we say is we want you to invite. Ultimately, we want people to invite people to Jesus. But oftentimes the first step is inviting them to church, and through the context of experiencing Jesus through and around and in other Christians and around other people, it's the first full invitation they have to be exposed to the love of God for themselves. And so we say, in light of who we're for, this is what we want to do. And I would say this, for some of you, this is the most important thing that you will hear today. Maybe more important than all the other things, is that you will never be fully satisfied in your life apart from a relationship with Jesus. That's why this last one of inviting is such a huge deal for us. So this is how we go about doing what Jesus said, of bringing light into the world. This is how we go about what Jesus said of trying to bring the kingdom of Jesus here. Now, some of you hear all of this, and you kind of are a little skeptical. You're like, yeah, that's a good try, Chris, but I see what you're doing. See, the truth is, I could do any of these things, and I don't have to do those through the local church. And I would tell you, that's actually true. You don't have to do any of these things through the local church. But I want to give you two thoughts. The first one is this. Are you actually going to do it? Like, so many times when I hear people like their skepticism of doing something like this or moving their gifts or their dollars or connecting in the local church or inviting to, they feel like these things are manipulation. But let me ask you, if you're for, my guess is if you're watching this, your heart breaks for this just like mine does. Are you actually going to do this somewhere else, or is that just a thing that gives you permission to not engage? Our friend Andy Stanley says this so well. He says, the past is a better indicator of the future than a promise. The chances if you aren't already doing something about this on your own, you're probably not going to. Second thing that I would say is this. The local church was Jesus' idea. And man, he has so much better ideas than me, so many better ideas than me. The local church was his idea, and I would say this, yes, the local church ultimately is imperfect because it's led by imperfect people just like me. But when we do these things through the context of the local church, when we lead and give and connect and invite through the local church, here's what happens. 1,000 lights together bring way more illumination than one light alone. There's something beautiful about the power of doing something together, and the local church together can bring massive amounts of illumination to a community. The second thing is this. When we do these things through the local church, I believe it allows Jesus, I believe it allows God to take his rightful place as the hero of the story. Not us, not anyone else, not any organization, but just Jesus, just God. In fact, this is, I think, what Jesus was referring to in the original verses that we read. This is what he said. He said, let your light shine before others. Why? That they may see your good deeds. They're going to see what you've done. And then they're going to glorify your Father in heaven. When we do what we're supposed to do as the church, and when we do what we're supposed to do through the church, it brings glory to God. And I believe that it shines light into the darkness in unbelievable ways. But I believe it puts the spotlight ultimately on God and says that he is the one where all of the glory belongs. I want to tell you a quick story. You're going to think I'm a terrible human being for this, and you'll probably be right. When I was a kid, I grew up with a fishing pond behind my house and loved going fishing. Like, it was kind of my peaceful moment. It was a thing like that just took my mind off of every other thing. And so a lot of times me and my brother would go down there. I'd go down with friends, and we had catfish. And I don't know if you know anything about catfishing, but growing up, we would fish with chicken liver for that. And so that was what was happening on this particular day. And a lot of times we had cats and dogs, and they would follow us down. And I messed relentlessly with our cats. And so I remember I was actually messing with one of our cats. I'd reeled in my hook, had a little bit of chicken liver on it. Turns out not only catfish, but also cats like chicken liver. So I'd put it just out of reach, and when they would swipe for it, I would move it. And they would swipe for it, and I would move it again. Now, some of you feel like you can already see where this story is going, and you're probably right. There was one point where that cat, with like ninja speed, right at the same time that my brother was saying, hey, stop messing around. Before he could finish the sentence, that cat pounced, and both paws went on to that hook, and with one motion, it went directly into its mouth. And it happened like this, but in my brain, it was like, oh no. And I was watching this thing go down, and it was terrifying. Now, let me just stop there and ask you, have you ever hooked a cat with a fishing hook? No, you haven't. You want to know why? Because only an idiot would hook a cat with a fishing hook. And that was exactly what happened. And again, it was terrifying. Now, let me just stop there and say, my brother was completely ticked off. He was so mad. And at that point, he could have chosen to lecture me. He could have chosen to remind me that this was all my fault and that I was an idiot. And all of that would have been true, and all of that would have been fair. None of that would have been helpful, though. So at that moment, I didn't know what to do. I had two options. I could start reeling, and I'm thinking, okay, that's not going to make things better. So instead, I reached down and I grabbed the cat. Now, I am not this cat's friend for obvious reasons at this point. I grab the cat, and it immediately just starts to rip my arms to shreds. And my brother looks and realizes, okay, this is a two-man job. So he jumps into action, goes in. I'm holding the cat. It's making this shrieking noise I've never heard an animal make that would make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The whole thing's just terrifying. He reaches in. He starts working on the hook. Feels like an hour. It's probably about 15 seconds. He pops the hook out. That cat takes off running, and then I'm just standing there, shell-shocked, like, oh my word, I cannot believe that just happened, and I probably need to go up to the house and change my pants right now. It was one of those kind of things. And I remember my brother looked at me. He didn't say a word. He just shook his head, looked at me again, and turned around and walked off. It was rightfully a moment of shame. He just didn't say a word, just walked away. Now, I'm pretty sure that is a brand new definition of catfishing, just saying. Now, sometimes it just doesn't matter who's to blame. Sometimes it just doesn't matter. It's true, but it doesn't matter. What we need sometimes is for someone to step into the middle of the chaos, in the middle of our arms getting scratched, and just take the hook out of the cat's mouth. Sometimes what we need is someone to show up to the dumpster fire with a bucket of water. Sometimes what we need is for someone to show up into the darkness with light. I'm telling you guys, it is time for the church. It is time for followers of Jesus to step up and be the light in darkness. And I want to give you one really simple thing to do that every single one of you can do. So wherever you're watching from, I want you to take out your phone right now. Some of you may be watching this on your phone. Take out your phone. If I lost you somewhere along the way and you were playing a game, it's right there accessible. That's great. Take out your phone, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to text these two words, do something, to 94,000. I want you to do it right now. Everybody that's watching, I want you to take this simple step. I want you to do something. And if you say, well, this is not my church, or I just logged in today, I want you to find a local church somewhere and do this. But text the word, do something, to 94,000. And then some options are going to come up. Ways for you to do something about who and what we're for, to bring the light to bear in this world, to bring the kingdom of Jesus, which is beautiful, to bear in this world. So take that simple step. Let's see what we can do together the light that we can collectively bring to a dark world when we do it together is truly remarkable. The nature of Jesus' church is truly remarkable. Let me pray for us. Father, you're a good Father. Thank you for being patient with us. Thank you for giving us the church. Thank you for not only giving us the church and allowing us to be some reflection of the light that is ultimately you, but God, thanks for giving us the instructions and the reminder of how to do it and the permission to do this through the context of the local church and to bring hope to the world. God, to help those that are marginalized, the next generation, lost sons and daughters. And I pray that today you would inspire, that you would encourage, that you would motivate men, women, children, teenagers to literally look up and figure out how to position themselves right in the right place to do something and to be the light that disperses the darkness. Father, thank you for your mercy. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your grace. In Jesus' name we pray. Hey, I want to thank you for joining us today. Thanks for wherever you're watching, whoever you're watching with, whether you're in the Collective Cafe, whether you're watching with your community group, whether you're watching with friends or family. I want to give you one more piece, one more thing that I would love for you to do. Love for you to just take a little bit of time, maybe the next few minutes, and discuss with your community group, with the people sitting around you in the Collective Cafe, with the people that you came with, or in a car ride a little bit later. I want you to discuss this one question. What are some simple things that you can do or not do at home, work, or your neighborhood or school to be the light in the darkness? Listen, don't underestimate what we as positioned light bearers can do in the world around us. But just start by having a conversation, share some ideas, and see what might happen. I want you to join us next week for part 2 of Dumpster Fire.
Thanks again for joining us today. We hope you found today's message helpful. I'm sure that it's going to provoke a lot of thoughts, a lot of questions, as hopefully all of us together as a church can wrestle with what our responsibility is meant to be. And we hope you'll consider taking a next step, just like Chris was talking about. And then we'll see you again next week for part 2 of Dumpster Fire.